Today I'm chatting to Kate Strickland. Kate is a child life therapist who has worked in the cardiac department and paediatric intensive care unit at the Royal Children's Hospital in Melbourne, and now works delivering these vital therapy supports in community setting, one of the first to do so in Victoria. Kate offers services to support infants, children and families impacted by chronic medical conditions or medical trauma.
Control is such an important thing for children. And when you put them in a medical setting, it's basically so much of that is taken away. You know, we're expecting them to do all sorts of things in unfamiliar situations. And so it's really important that they've got a sense of control and understanding on what's happening.
Before we begin, we would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we record. Today we are recording on country of the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains. We pay our respects to elders past and present who are a part of the world's oldest continuing culture and our first storytellers. We acknowledge the importance of supporting health for all peoples now and in the future. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander listeners should be aware that this podcast may contain images, voices, and names of deceased persons. It's a very exciting, warm welcome to have you here for this podcast, Kate. So welcome. Where are you joining us from today?
Thanks, Sammy. I am calling in from very cold Melbourne today.
Oh, very good. It's chilly here in Adelaide too, so not to worry. So, Kate, we're really excited to have you. So we'd love to explore the benefits, and in particular the benefits of the therapy that you provide, and also to allied health services for those with childhood-onset heart disease. So your offerings are quite unique. So could you tell me a little bit about it, and what is child life therapy?
Absolutely. So child life therapy is essentially play-based interventions, which, as you said, is aimed at supporting infants, children and young people to cope with the challenges associated with medical procedures and hospitalisation. So it really allows children the opportunity to express their emotions and process difficult and challenging medical experiences.
Yeah, and I suppose that's something that we forget, don't we, as adults, that our children are experiencing these things in a unusual environment, obviously a clinical setting, and to know that they can be supported through, I suppose, their way of communicating, which is through play. So it must be incredibly enjoyable and insightful at the same time, like getting them to actually release all those sort of concerns in that environment and just go back to what they know, which is play.
Oh, absolutely. And I think, play is really the work of children, and it's the way that they communicate. And so being able to do it through play is, as you said, it's actually a really beautiful thing, and being able to support the kids through that is fantastic.
So, Kate, how is child life therapy different to occupational therapy?
So I suppose child life therapy is a healthcare profession that specialises in child development, and so we've all sort of got a background in either education or another health-related field. My journey started as I trained to be an occupational therapist, and I worked in mental health space, and then I completed my education degree and worked out that I really wanted to combine the two of them, and ended up in child life therapy. So child life therapy is specialised in that it specifically focuses on providing support for children in the medical space, so undergoing procedures or treatment. There are definitely lots of overlaps between the professions, particularly in regards to our sort of strong understanding of child development. However, child life therapy interventions are all play and education based to specifically engage and empower young people to understand and cope with their medical journey. So, go.
I was going to say that's just so wonderful to hear. Like it's a therapy that's realistically getting right down to where we need to be into supporting the children. Like I love the fact that you said that majority of people who go into this profession come from an education or medical background and clearly a love of children and wanting to support children. So it's really interesting to hear. So what's the evidence around these sort of strategies, these play-based strategies in the medical environment?
So I think there's certainly a really growing body of evidence around the importance of, if we're thinking about a trauma-informed approach, making sure that kids have a voice, that they're powered, that there's choice and control, and thinking about, evidence-based strategies that we use specifically, which are in procedures, in preparing and supporting kids for particular procedures.
Ah, okay. So that's a really unique difference between, say, yourself and an occupational therapist. Like that's something that I can relate to straight away, that you're there specifically helping them through that medical procedure.
Absolutely.
So can you talk me through how you would do that? How you would do that in a, in a clinical setting? How would you go about preparing a child for a procedure?
Yeah, of course. So I suppose traditionally, like child life therapists have been based in hospitals. So within the hospital setting, the focus is on helping the children prepare for and cope with the medical procedure. So we do this through play. So we might have a doll, toy, or real medical equipment. We use developmentally appropriate explanations of what's going on and what they're going to expect to see, and sort of help them develop some coping strategies around that. And I think, as we mentioned before, control is such an important thing for children. And when you put them in a medical setting, it's basically so much of that is taken away. We're expecting them to do all sorts of things in unfamiliar situations. And so it's really important that they've got a sense of control and understanding on what's happening.
And I think you've touched on something which is sometimes overlooked in those clinical settings, is developmentally where they're at. I love that you just even referenced that so you really break it down and you get on their level. And like you said, there's a huge expectation for a child who's developing those coping mechanisms anyway as a developing child and, brain, to then put a child in that clinical setting, like you said, that just all of a sudden is completely foreign and probably incredibly overwhelming and probably scary, especially when you start talking medical equipment and procedures. You say the word needle, knife, all those sorts of things. So it's great to sort of have you unpack that and understand that you're breaking it down for them on their level so they can start to develop those coping mechanisms. So what are some of the play-based therapy activities you do? Like you mentioned, there might be a doll. Is there other ways that you prepare a child?
Oh, absolutely. So again, it really depends on the developmental age of the child in terms of, I suppose, the language we use and breaking it down for them. So we would use resources like visual schedules. We might use, I suppose, social stories to help them understand. There's a lot of specific videos that have been prepared as well to help children understand the process and explain to them exactly sort of how things happen. And I think one of the things that is also really important is that children have the most amazing imaginations, and we never want to, crush that. But I think sometimes also that little people hear big people talking, they might see things on television, they might, pick up little bits of conversation, and in their head, those misconceptions can really lead to, thoughts or worries that might not be, even there, just thinking about, some of the terms and the languages, we use in hospitals. So, if we're talking about going to surgery, oh, the doctors will put you to sleep. Well, a child might have had a pet that was put to sleep,
Yes, that sounds incredibly frightening.
Yeah. And, their pet cat didn't come back, and all of this sort of, fear and worry that comes, with that. So I think it's just really important that we give kids a space as well to ask questions, to encourage them, to get them to explain to us what they think's happening so that we can address, any of those misconceptions and help them through their fears and worries.
Yeah, lovely. Like you said, I think earlier, you're empowering them. You're empowering them to
Absolutely.
feel safe and communicate. So it sounds like child life therapy is just as unique as our COHD community. So it's great to know that there are specific supports for the different developmental ages and obviously individuals and obviously different procedures and so forth. So what sorts of things are offered to keep learning and support continuing sort of past the hospital? Like you're saying, you're developing that coping mechanism whilst they're about to undergo a procedure. Is there anything for after that?
Yeah, so I think for me, that's why I moved into community-based child life therapy, because there was so much support that was available once they were in hospital. But then, I would speak to parents after and they would just say, I just don't know what to do now. I'm lost, and they might not find support in the community that has that understanding of what it's like for a child going through medical procedures and medical experiences. And so we, sort of again, give kids a space to be able to process some of that medical trauma and those medical experiences. So, while we also, create resources and things to help them beforehand, we might work with them afterwards in terms of, allowing them to process that through play. And it's amazing the things that kids will come up with. And, they might not want to talk directly about their experience, but, you put them in a room with a whole lot of things, and a lot of those emotions and a lot of those feelings will come out in their play. And also, we might, it might be appropriate to do a social story for them as well, again, to help them, with a language for their experience that they've had.
And I suppose the other thing you're touching on there is it's not just about the moment then and there. There's obviously leading up to, there's after. And I think sometimes as adults, we work through all that in our minds, or as like myself being a heart parent, I prep it out all in my head first, and then we get to the day and then we do the procedure, and then I go, oh, that's done. But then, like you're sort of touching on, that might not necessarily mean that it's done for the child. Like I've had time, because I'm an adult, to step it through. So it's obviously the before piece and the after piece. So are there any activities that parents or caregivers could consider to implement before or after, or for the first time? What are your recommendations there?
Yeah, look, I think the thing that we know from all the research is that kids cope better with predictable environments. Okay, so they're gonna feel a lot more comfortable, a lot safer when they understand what's going to happen. So they go into a hospital or to a medical, center or whatever it is, and all of a sudden they're seeing things that they're unfamiliar with. There are strange sights and smells and people. And often, you've got strange people asking you to do really strange things, take your top off and I'm going to put this cold gel on you, or I'm going to stick a needle in you, like
So true.
it's so foreign to so many kids that are going into there. So the more that we can help prepare kids beforehand is fantastic. So it could be as simple as, if you're talking to them about, say they're going into the hospital for, some cardiac checks or, sort of routine echoes and ECGs and things like that, you might tell them what the day might look like. So how are you going to get to the hospital, or what might they see when they arrive? So, who are the people that they're going to meet? And I think those little things can just help them with their understanding of what is going to happen. I think in terms of, thinking maybe as well about building on some of their coping strategies. So, little things like sort of teaching them some belly breathing, or, practice counting, they can count backwards and, or wiggle their toes, and little strategies like that can also be really helpful.
Yeah, that's wonderful, Kate. So we're really just helping them by us verbalizing those steps. What I was speaking to before, that we map it out in our head. So really we're verbalizing, and to your point, what you guys do and specialize in is getting down on their level, speaking at their developmental language. And like you said, leaning on their already current coping mechanisms, whether it be like, remember that time you went on that slide? Remember you felt really nervous at the top, but then at the end it was okay? I know that's probably a strange.
No,
Yeah,
it's really
yeah.
good because you're relating it to their previous experience, which they've never had before. So, like they've never been in that situation. So what can you relate it to, whether it's going to the GP or whatever it is. But I do think also that one of the main things that I, would love to emphasize is around choice and control, because I think, when they go to the hospital, so much of that choice is taken away from them. So little things like asking them, for the procedures and things, do you want to sit with mum or dad, or, which toy do you want to bring in, or what would you like to do after the procedure?
The opportunity, giving them the opportunity to make the decision.
Yeah, because a lot of those things they can't decide, and I think sometimes even just the language in some of the medical fields, it's like, okay, oh, would you like to have your blood test now? Well, no, they're all going to say, every kid's going to say, no, I wouldn't. But what are the choices we can actually give them, Which arm would you like to use? Or would you like to, play with this squishy toy or watch something on the iPad?
Yeah, wonderful, Kate. So insightful and so true. We sometimes get caught up in the moment, don't we, as the parents or the caregivers, and forget that just like we're mapping it out in our little minds. Like you said, they've got a beautiful imagination that's probably thinking of worst case scenario and what does that mean? Am I going to bleed forever after they meet with a needle? So that's really wonderful. So how I also understand that you're a really strong advocate and of that family-centered supports and sort of increasing that capacity for all family members. And I know even in my case, obviously, and like many, I have a heart kid. Well, actually, now I have two now. My daughter's now being diagnosed with a heart condition as well. But it affects everyone, doesn't it? It affects when there is one little person in your tribe that is unwell or needing that medical attention or intervention. You've got those other little onlookers, haven't you, of little people thinking, oh gosh, what does that mean? And one of the things I've referred to a few times on this podcast, and I'm sure many families listening will attest to this, the first time you hear, oh, that's okay, your baby will go into heart failure, or at some point they'll go into heart failure. And even as an adult hearing that for the first time, you think, oh my gosh, does that mean my child is going to die then and there? But you realize it's a process, and what they're really doing is talking about a process that's happening within the body and within the heart. But if you look at just the general language, you think, oh my goodness, this is so confronting. And then, like you said, there's these little people's ears and eyes hearing this too. So what can we do for our siblings? What can we do for our siblings, and how can we support them?
So I think the thing that struck me most about working with cardiac families was the incredible impact that it had, not only the HeartKids themselves and their parents, but the siblings and extended family as well.
So true.
Yeah, it's a journey that everybody goes through, and it can be scary and isolating and certainly challenging for everybody involved. And I suppose if you think about, siblings, so it could be that, if they've got a new baby brother or sister, they've been whisked off for surgery before they've even had a chance to meet them. Mum might be in hospital recovering, or it could be that they've already, that they've been with their sibling a long time, and then they've got to go off to hospital and have this operation. And, there's so many things that get disrupted, normal routines like school and kinder, it might be that they have to stay with other people. So I think.
So true. There'd be so many families listening to this, Kate, and you're speaking volumes to them right now, because it's exactly that. It's like you said, someone else is now putting them to bed. It's not mum and dad, or mum's in hospital, dad's in hospital, whatever. So grandma or auntie or neighbour or, good family friend or whatever it is, their routine is completely out of whack too.
100%. And I think too, and, as you touched on before, their little ears hear things as well. And in the same way that, it is for kids who are going through it, they hear bits of pieces of information, and also kids are incredibly intuitive. They pick up on the stress of parents, even if they're not old enough to verbalize that. They know when something's different. They know when, things have changed. And I think it does have a huge impact. So I think in the community, really thinking about how can we support these kids to address those fears, those misconceptions, and explain things in a way that's, again, developmentally appropriate to their understanding. And I use a lot of social stories in this situation, and I'll get parents to take photos of, the HeartKid, the hospital, the room, and we're able to explain what some of that equipment is, and you put it in terms that are less scary, less intimidating, and to give them a language. I had a little boy who was a sibling. He was 4 years old, and he just was so confused about everything that was happening. And we did this, Mum had sent these beautiful photos through, and we did this social story, and he took it to kinder the next day, and he read it to the class, and he was so happy because he could now explain what was happening for him.
What was going on.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's so, Kate, so you're really sort of touching on something, I suppose, that we look and we talk to a bit more, and you talked about choice and control and all of that, is we're really, and that empowerment piece. I know obviously the Royal Children's Hospital champion this space, same with the Brisbane Hospital, Brisbane Kids as well. I know Adelaide, like everyone around the country is trying really hard to really not just talk about choice and control, but live it, and really ensure that that's, like you said, not just the person who's sitting in the bed, but the mum, the dad, the sibling, to ask those questions. So then, like we've said, we've moved it into that community setting. You're supporting families then with social stories. So realistically, you're supporting the whole family, if that's what I'm really taking from this, because you're not just providing a therapy to the child, you're providing that therapy realistically for the whole family, because there'd be a lot of parents that in these moments are overwhelmed or riddled with anxiety and worry. The last thing we can think of is, how do we turn this into a social story? Or do we even know what a social story is? So I love this whole concept, because it does affect, like we always say, it's, I say, I'm a heart mum for life, or a heart kid for life. Do you know what I mean? That whole narrative it's lifelong. It affects siblings. So you're really wrapping everything around to support the entire family.
Yeah, look, I think that's the idea. And when I work with families in the community, it really is about getting an understanding of the unique perspective, because every single heart kid is so different in not only their journey, what they've experienced, what the future holds. There are so many complexities to it. And so it really is just individually based on what is going on for that particular family. And I think it's also important, to note too that, we do work with babies and infants. And I think historically that, often it was like, oh, well, babies can't remember, infants can't remember, so we'll just do what we need to do.
Yeah,
But
no.
we really know the impact now on those neural pathways and the impact that has on babies and infants long term. So for me, it's also about, having opportunities to work with parents to educate them about ways that they can engage with their baby, provide those positive sensory experiences, and develop some of those positive neural pathways as well.
I'm so glad you touched on that, Kate, because I think there has always been that's overlooked. And I know when I went through my son's surgery, there was a lot of comments of, that's okay. The good thing is he won't remember. He won't remember, and he's not going to feel anything. And just remember that long-term memory doesn't kick in until whatever age, and all this sort of stuff. And it's really funny. It's lovely even just hearing you just verbalize this, because I think there'd be a lot of parents going, no, I know that my son, daughter, child remembers this experience, or there must be a reason why whenever, the light goes off at a certain time or something happens, that they have a physical response. It might not always be an emotional response. I think that develops over time, but I think there is definitely that physical sort of trauma that they remember. Would I be right in saying that?
Absolutely, 100%. It might not be that they cognitively remember the experience, but their body remembers. And what will happen is, you'll see kids struggling with emotional regulation. You might see kids flipping into fight or flight or even freeze in these experiences. And I think, for infants, there are definitely non-pharmacological things that we can be doing to support them. And I think that, sometimes, and again, I think that, we're doing some amazing work in that area. But also, I think it's a position where, particularly if you've got a new baby and you've never had to deal with hospitals and the language and the medical jargon and all that sort of stuff, and you're focused on, okay, how do we get through tonight? It's hard to focus on,
Really is.
okay, well, what will this look like long term for my baby? So I suppose just popping it in people's head that, that this can go alongside that path as well.
And it's great for these opportunities. And that's why, this podcast is so important. It's so important to our community. It's so important to even the broader community to understand our community, which then obviously turns into an advocacy piece and everything else. I know a couple of episodes back, I spoke with Dr. Prem. He's a cardiac surgeon up in Brisbane Hospital. And he was saying one of the things that he saw was the sooner he could get parents holding their babies, like he could see the outcome of the healing process was expedited. And so basically he was fast tracking basically ICU. And
Yeah,
he said, obviously, that sounds a bit sort of crazy and a bit out there, but he said that human touch, that touch that's coming from the mum, the dad, the loved ones, obviously, usually in ICU, the mum or the dad or the caregiver. He said, we just saw these babies thrive. They were breathing on their own quicker. They were doing this and that. Obviously, he said they were stable as long as they were stable enough, but he really wanted to shorten that time. And I think that's a lot to what you're saying. So Kate, you've learned, obviously, you've studied, you've learned all these beautiful skills, you've overlaid obviously your education, but then obviously your love of children, the understanding of the medical world inside of a hospital. So move me out now into the community. So what does a typical day look like for you now that you're based in the community? Like we said, you're one of the first that have gone and done it, because usually we'd come across you in that hospital setting. So how do I engage you now? What does that look like?
So my organisation is called Healing Hearts Beyond. And I suppose it came out of the fact that, I'd been working with cardiac families for such a long time. And I saw the need to do this outside of, once we got outside of that hospital environment. I do work, though, with kids who have got long-term medical conditions that aren't just cardiac related. But I suppose what it looks like is that, parents will contact me, make a referral, and we do an assessment. And again, as I said, it's really individualized according to what the child needs. So, it might be that they're going in for a particular procedure, or they have a particular fear of a certain procedure, whether that's, blood tests or echoes or whatever it is, and we work on that. It might be building up coping strategies or helping them process after they've been in hospital. So doing one-on-one, therapeutic play afterwards, medical play, which is both sort of free medical play, but also some structured medical play in there as well. And also then, when in that assessment we talk about families and what does that look like for the whole family?
Yeah.
Do you need sibling support? Or if it is an infant, can we do some one-on-one education where we can talk about ways that you can help support your baby, or, things like that.
Amazing, amazing. And we always love, just so you know, Kate, we always love on this podcast anyone that falls in love with our cardiac or heart babies. And then they get that.
It's hard not to.
Yeah. And then we love it, because we love then chatting with people like yourself that say, I worked here and then I did that and then I just had to keep going. And we think, thank you. Just so you know, our entire community thanks you. So, Kate, the next step from here is obviously we've gone through either we've engaged you to help us through an upcoming procedure or whatever else. We know that we can then lean on you to support our siblings or extended family, I suppose, because we all know it takes a village.
Yeah,
so you're
absolutely.
not just supporting the child, you're supporting the parents and everything else. So it's wonderful that you've taken all that wealth of knowledge and you've brought it out to the community. And I'm assuming you're really opening it up. Like you said, it's not just HeartKids, it's anyone with that sort of medical trauma. So what happens as our children then develop? Like, have you got instances where you're like, oh gosh, I remember this family in the clinical setting. Now I've supported them in the community, and hang on a minute, they're getting older. They're getting older. I can't just pull out the social story. They don't want to see the Joel with the blood pressure, strapped around the arm. They're all over this now. So how do you evolve? How do you evolve with the child? Or
That is a very good question. And I think again, it really depends what the family are needing out, or the child is teenager is needing out of it. I've had some families who have come back who have been HeartKids and then are HeartKids, but they've had their surgery many years ago and now they've just got to go for some routine blood tests and they are not coping with that. And so, but they're not going to want to come to me and sit down, as you said, and play with the dolls. So what I do is, in that situation, I will often have a conversation with parents about, plans and sitting down with their child and developing a plan. And I give them a pro forma to use about, things that they can do to try and help it. We talk about coping strategies. The other thing is that there are lots of opportunities in the community as well, and for older children. And I think as you get older, you develop obviously a stronger language around these things. So talking therapy becomes more of an option. So, accessing things through the GP, such as psychologists, and, there are specific therapies such as like cognitive behavioral therapy or EDMR, which is the eye movement and desensitization reprocessing. And those specific techniques are designed to help people overcome specific traumatic events and desensitize them. So there's lots of opportunities in the community as well to access those services, which can be done through the GP too.
That's phenomenal knowledge. And that's amazing. And as we know, people listening are either just starting out on the journey or they're on their way through. And hence why we try to, on this podcast, really kind of step people through. We've spoken to people that are, have been kindy directors who receive these little people and, you know, mum and dad, it's the first time handing them over into that sort of bigger group setting and so forth. And, you know, what does that look like? So it's great to hear that it really follows along with their journey and their evolution. So, Kate, what can you leave us with tonight, like in the regards of resources or books or something that you can point parents in the direction of, whether it be before they go to hospital or after? What are some things that you think that are just in your time and your experience, like these are just some great go-tos?
Okay, so I would have to say that for me, the Be Positive videos, which are on the RCH website,
Oh, yeah.
are the most phenomenal resource. I say this because they're told by a child, in the voice of a child, in the language that children use. And so it gives a really good explanation, step by step. It shows them what to expect. So they've got an understanding, and they've got that on blood tests, finger pricks, echoes, ECGs, comfort holds, positioning, all that sort of thing. Also, they've made a brand new one, which you can access on YouTube, about coming into the cardiac pre-admission, which is a whole package, and it's amazing. So you can find that on YouTube.
That is phenomenal, especially for people like myself. I'm in Adelaide, so we didn't know what it looked like. I know other people who are residents of different cities, they sometimes pop in just to get themselves familiar to what it looks like. So that's great to know that there's an online resource. That's amazing.
Absolutely. And I think too, it's very translatable as well. So if you've got a child who's going in for an echo in Sydney, or you're going up in Queensland, the whole process is still very similar. So it is very translatable as well. I think for parents, there are two particular books that I really like. The first being, it's called Help, My Child's in Hospital, and that's written by Becky Walco. And it is really a parent survival guide about, sort of practical advice for parents on preparing.
We definitely need those, yes.
Yes. And the other one is called Everybody Stay Calm, How to Support Your Child Through Medical Tests and Procedures. Again, it's got some really good ways to help prepare children, but also it's about advocating for your child, because I know that can be a really challenging part.
Definitely.
Yeah. For kids, there's lots of great books out there in terms of, going to hospital and, having a hospital stay and things like that. And I'm sure you guys have heard of Dr. Remy Kowalski from the RCH has written her
Yes.
book on all about the heart, which is great. I've also just finished a book, which is awaiting publication, which is called
Do tell.
it's called My Heart is Brave, and it's probably aimed at younger children. And it's just about a little boy going through the cardiac process and needing procedures and surgery. And again, just helping with the language around that, illustrated by the very talented Judy Begoff. So hopefully you'll see that shortly.
Oh, okay. That sounds fantastic. And I'm sure everybody listening has been quickly jotting down those what great titles too.
And also just lastly, I know
that one.
Also, just lastly, and we talked a little bit about infant support, and there's a music therapist called Lauren Kilslip, who I'm running a parental education program with for 5 weeks starting in September, called Navigating and Supporting Your Infant's Medical Journey. So please feel free to reach out if you know any families with babies or infants who might need some extra guidance and support. It's just an online program that we'll run for 5 weeks, and every family is welcome.
That's wonderful, Kate. And as you know, we're a broad nation, and that's the beauty of technology, that we have a podcast that this could be being listened to, in outback Queensland, right through to down in Tassie or over in the West. So it's wonderful to know that you've even got that online, an opportunity for people to jump in and be a part of a much bigger community and have that support and guidance from yourself. Well, Kate, this has been so insightful. I've learned so much. I'm sure everyone listening now is going to rush out and try and find a child life therapist like yourself, Kate, and really just lean in and learn. I think, we can sometimes be really caught up in what's going on for us. And don't get me wrong, I'm not discounting everything that we feel as adults, or what it's like to be a parent and to go through it. And, I've walked down that path. I'm very familiar with it. But to know that there's people like yourself that are now dedicating your life to finding ways that we can break it down for those little people of ours and just help them, like you said, help them communicate, empower them to tackle this head on, because We need that
voice.
village.
I think
And have a voice. Yeah. We really need that village around us, and they need to know that they have a voice.
Absolutely.
Well, Kate, thank you so very much. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we look forward to your book launch.
Thank you, Sami. Lovely to chat to you tonight.
Indeed. Sometimes this podcast talks about some heavy things. If this brings up anything for you or someone you love, it is important to reach out for support. The HeartKids helpline provides support and guidance for anyone impacted by CHD. You can call the helpline on 1800 432 785. To access more information about CHD, as well as support from HeartKids, visit the website at heartkids.org.au. The information on this podcast is not a substitute for medical advice from your doctor or healthcare team. Always talk to your doctor about matters that affect you or your family's health.